have no concept of Timbuktu as an ancient university, culture, and so on. And it's our fault. We have to teach this history so that young people will want to identify with it. And what grieves me is the young girls right now in 2007 who are growing up feeling that they are ugly. It's a tragedy. And we have to look at what are the images out there that will tell young people, particularly the women, because, as Buche Mecheta says in one of her novels, a man is never ugly, Ugliness does not stop men from going ahead, But women now are under pressure to be beautiful. And so there's this pressure on women. Yes, but gentlemen, what we're talking about. The ugliest man with the biggest belly and the baldest head can get young girls. Not true. Men are so lucky these days, bald head is in. So that is not even a problem. And women, it's just the way in which middle-aged women just are old, and middle-aged men are distinguished. It's that kind of. And so there's this pressure on the girls, and I think it has to do with the whole conception of how people see themselves as black people. So it can't be a seasonal thing. It can't be that Afro is in, locks is in, this is in. It has to be that as parents, we give our children models of beauty, models of value that affirm who they are as black people, so that people don't have to go into this denial about their great-great-great-grandfather was white. And you can't see nothing on them that looks like that, And why so-called white people can claim their African heritage too. That we recognize value in our history and in our present. So thank you, and I hope the elders are listening to this young lady. She's raising a serious point, and you are the ones who have to be giving her the models. Yes, sir.
Okay. First, I'd like to say I enjoyed your talk very much.
Thank you, sir.
I have two quick questions.
Yes.
Do you think the mainstream media and the advent of cable TV has contributed in deculturizing us as a race? And if the answer to that is yes, do you think this is deliberate, or there are some Rastafarians who believe that it's like a conspiracy, a deliberate attempt to keep down black people? What's your take on this?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer. I am not trying to dodge it, but I believe that the mainstream media is about making money. That is what mainstream media is about. And when you look at the way in which American television has penetrated the world, you realize that there was a deliberate, some of you may not know, but the American film industry was definitely used as an instrument of cultural imperialism. The American government used to give away movies all over the world just so that people could see America, and the whole American value system was just out there. So yes, mainstream media is about a political agenda of economic and cultural dominance. Now in Jamaica, I think the cable television stations, I could say that what they do is put on a lot of local programming. I don't know if that's the same here, but the cable stations have been the ones where the local culture gets pushed. Now, it's true, a lot of it is music videos and stuff that people might find counterproductive. I'm one of the people who suggest that dancehall isn't as negative as people think it is. I try to read it, in positive ways, but I believe that it all depends on the particular cultural context, because it's not so easy to generalize across the region. But it's understandable if the mainstream media and even the new cable stations push certain ideologies, because the people who own the media make the decisions about what they want to see there. And that's why I'm really serious about the point that we need to own some of the media too. We can't just sit back and say the media. Sometimes the people we come from a culture of susu, partner, putting together our little bits and pieces. We don't need to wait on some big person to set us up. If 2,000 people decide to put up $1,000, we can do the thing, but we just sit back and just chat and don't do what we can do, because sometimes we get so accustomed to the victim posture that we don't see. But if my ancestors 300 years ago were able to run their own provision grounds. Do you know that there were enslaved people who used to lend money to plantation owners? Did you know that? Some people don't know that. The enslaved had provision grounds where they were making money, and some of them could lend money to their quote-unquote owners. These are the aspects of our history that we don't talk about, so that even though slavery was terrible, people used the little spaces that were possible for economic productivity. Those people were enslaved. We're not enslaved. We can go to the bank and borrow money. So what are we sitting down and quarreling about that the media not playing our music? You understand? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We can do more than we're doing. Can you imagine if our enslaved ancestors had the opportunities that we have now, what they would have done? Look what they did, and they were enslaved. We are a disgrace to them.
What you say? Good evening. Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Nicolette Bethel, currently serving as Director of Culture for my sins.
I know
and
you.
the sins of others.
You're a very prosperous but sinful person.
What I wanted to pick up on was the whole idea of orality, which you haven't talked about, but it's something that, how do I want to express it? There's something that helped me to identify how to look at Bahamian national identity, which has a very different kind of format from the rest of the Caribbean. And I argue that it has to do with the oral nature of the Bahamian society. But the paradox of that is that while orality has empowered Bahamians and allowed us to create an identity that we may not necessarily recognize here, it has also disempowered us because, as you say, the power of the world has to do with the control of information. And in order to control information, you have to master the literacy that enables us to do that. And it's a very interesting kind of pushing and pulling. What we tend to do is we tend to divide everything up into binary and say something is either or, and we cannot seem to reconcile the two, the strength of the oral tradition and the strength of orality and the access to power of the literate. And I just wondered if you would be able to comment on that.
Yeah, well, one of the interesting things, you see, is that the new technologies, starting with sound recording, give oral culture a kind of authority that it didn't used to have, so that the new technologies, in fact, facilitate orality. So we have to think about how do TV, radio, and so on, how do these new media allow oral people to have more control over their own experience. It doesn't mean that, all of the contracts and stuff that you write up are not still bound in a discourse of literacy. But I tell you, there are some very clever ways in which non-literate people negotiate through our societies, and I think we need to start looking at it. A couple of months ago, a man came into the English department office, handed the secretary a letter, and she said to him, but this is not the Department of History, and she directed him to the history department. It only took me a second to realize that the man couldn't read. So I ran down the corridor after him and said, you can't read. I said, read the sign on the door, and he couldn't. And then he said, he knows that he should really go and get some lessons, but he just hadn't gotten around to it. So I said, but how you managed to get a job delivering letters? And you can't. All he does is to let the people read a letter for him. So he goes into a random office, hands the person the letter the person reads, and says, and I'm saying, but this is really great, and